Welcome again to Cedar Ridge. My name's Matthew, I'm the lead pastor, so warm welcome to everyone, whether you're here for the umpteenth time or the first time. We're really glad you're here. We're going to take a moment, as we often do at this point in the service, just to pray. It's sad in one respect because it seems like we're pretty much every week marking a tragedy of some kind, and there's been another shooting obviously this week in California. It's also Remembrance Sunday, right? Veterans Day, November the 11th. It's 100 years since the end of the First World War, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars, right? The Great War, and we know that that has not been the case. And so we're just going to mark some silence to remember those who have lost their lives, those who have suffered as a result of war. We're also going to remember the fact that there's this huge issue of gun violence in this nation. You know, we have that awful statistic that in the last 50 years, more people have died, citizens have died through gun violence than in all the wars in the history of the US. I mean, that's a pretty incredible statistic. I mean, it's a young country, but that's a lot of time and a lot of death. And so we're just going to hold some silence and remember. We're going to pray in our own way as well for God's mercy and compassion and comfort and peace for those that are struggling right now as a result of this latest shooting. And then I'll close us out with a prayer. But let's just hold some silence for a few moments. God, our hearts are heavy as we remember and we consider the consequences of war, the sacrifices that have had to be made, the trauma that causes. And we're conscious of the ongoing challenge of gun violence. And so right now we just cry out for mercy. Lord, we pray that you would comfort those who are suffering right now. I pray, Lord, that you would fill our hearts with love and compassion and hope. And help us not to give up, but look to you as the source of hope, the source of love, and the source of life. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, thank you so much for doing that. We're in the middle of all these sort of dark times or stories that we read about and hear about. There's also hope, right? And we're a community of hope and transformation. So, we're as we prayed there, we're not going to give up on hope. And I just wanted to share a couple of things. Like last week, these are stories of hope, if you like. Last week we had our service day where we went out and gave our whole Sunday worship service over to serving our local community, joined with people from some other faith communities as well. Lots of really great things happened. So thank you to everybody who came for that. We had a wonderful breakfast together, great time together, and then going out to serve others. So that was a beautiful time where we got to share God's love. And then yesterday we had a workshop all about racial justice in education. I think we have a couple of shots of that. We had a really fantastic time here. And we had some people from local government come and participate and attend. And we had some great discussions. We had Brenda Girton-Mitchell, who's a sort of an expert in these areas, and she shared a wonderful keynote address. So really great opportunity for us to understand more, to learn more, and also to hear what else is going on in the community around us, and then start talking about some practical action. So thank you to everybody that coordinated that. That was our racial reconciliation team. Thank you so much to you guys. And I don't wish to embarrass you, but I'm probably going to. If you guys could just stand, because I wanted, if you're on that team, if you could just stand up right now, if you wouldn't mind doing that. Is there anybody here? Oh, they've all gone out for coffee, obviously. Anyway, they must have known it was me speaking, I guess. But anyway, okay, so what I would say is, we would love more people to join that team, and the team is actually going to meet after the service. We'll be in room 203 around here. If you are interested in that, maybe you came along yesterday, or you're just interested in getting more involved, talk to somebody on that team or come and talk to me. Would love to get you more involved in what's going on, especially as we start getting more practical about what we can do around these issues of education, racial justice in education in our local area. So there's lots of reasons for us to feel positive. Now, if you were here at the beginning of the service, you have seen the video that we showed, which was a little sort of trailer for the Mr. Rogers documentary. Has anybody seen that documentary? Really worth watching. When I moved to this country, so it's 96, my older kids caught the tail end of some of Mr. Rogers' series, so we got to watch that. So it's has a lot of, I think when you see the documentary, has a lot of nostalgic value as well. But he addresses, or the editors and the producers address some really profound issues, I think, about Mr. Rogers' life in that documentary. And a quote that apparently has been going around on social media recently from Mr. Rogers: "I believe that appreciation is a holy thing, that when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time. So in loving and appreciating our neighbor, we're participating in something sacred." And this series we're in at the moment really relates right to that. We're in a series called Loving Our Neighbor, Loving Where We Live, and today is all about befriending our neighborhood. So we're talking about friendships with neighbors, friendships with people around us. And this idea of the sacred in people, and the fact that what we all have in common, and I think that came out in that clip that we saw there, is that we all long to be loved and we want to love. So we have we have so much in common as human beings. We also have in common the fact that often we don't get loved, or we fail to love others. So there's this sort of longing in our hearts for love. And then there's also this struggle when we don't get it, or we're missing it, or we're not able to give it ourselves. And that human condition of longing and struggle is something we're going to explore today in the context of friendship, because perhaps it's that unites us. And we're going to look at a story from the beginning, close to the beginning of John's Gospel, where Jesus engages with someone in a way that I think really shows the longing of the human heart. And Kevin and Gina are going to read that story for us today.
Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her,
"Will you give me a drink?"
His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans.
Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who is it that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water."
"Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?"
Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whosoever drink the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life."
The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water."
He told her, "Go and call your husband and come back."
"I have no husband," she replied.
Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true."
"Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem."
"Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, the time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know. For salvation is from the Jews. Yet at a time is coming and has now come when the true worship will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and the worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth."
The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us."
Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he."
Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him.
Thanks, guys. So we've got this story of Jesus in Samaria. I think we have a little map, actually. We were talking on the first week of this series. I don't know if you can actually see that, but Jesus is from this area, Galilee up here. He spent time in Jerusalem down here. And to get between Galilee and Jerusalem, you have to go through Samaria. And Samaria was an area that was populated by people who were kind of related to the Jews. If you go back in the history, we won't do that now, but they had sort of common ancestry, but they were ethnically different and religiously different. They had, as we see in some of the words that Jesus shares there, they had a slightly different theology, slightly different practice. So they were viewed as sort of pariah, really, by the Jewish people. And so many people would actually go around the outskirts of Samaria. They're trying to avoid Samaria, going between Galilee and Jerusalem. Jesus, for whatever reason, chooses to go right through, and he ends up at this well, and that's where we get this story. So, what we have here is a story, I think, of longing, and it's a story also of beautiful conversation, beautiful connection, human connection. We see this woman who, she sort of emerges in the story as someone who's clearly very needy. She, for whatever reason, her life has probably not gone the way she planned. We hear that with she's had a series of broken relationships and struggles, that comes out as we see the story. She's perhaps, we could say, maybe one of those people who's been looking for love in all the wrong places, right? She's experiencing this struggle that we're talking about, that we long to be loved, but things don't always work out that way. And then Jesus just beautifully engages with her and draws her out, and we'll talk a little bit about that conversation in just a second. But let's home in a little bit on this sense of longing. Here's a quote from Blaise Pascal, a famous philosopher. It's kind of in some respects, this is an old quote, so it's that language feels somewhat harsh, but I think we can all identify with this. Mankind, it's a little gender bias as well. Mankind, unable to escape death, trouble and ignorance, in order to make themselves happy, have hit upon the plan of never thinking about these things. The utmost efforts of their ingenuity can suggest no better consolation for such prodigious evils, but it is most miserable consolation, since it does not cure the evil, but merely to conceal it a little while, and by concealing it prevents men from attempting to obtain a cure. In other words, I think what Pascal is saying there is that we all have this struggle and desire to be loved. And when we pursue that desire in these sort of artificial, broken ways, perhaps in controlling ways rather than loving ways, it all breaks down, and we end up with addictions and all kinds of different behaviors that are actually ultimately destructive. But they sort of keep us afloat for a while, and perhaps help us to hide away and stay in denial enough so that we don't actually have to be really honest with ourselves and really address the roots of our anxieties and pains, as we would use that sort of terminology here in this community. And again, I think that's something that we all have in common as human beings. I think we can all identify with that, and I would bet my bottom dollar that every single person in the neighborhoods where we live feel the same way, or at least would acknowledge that if they were in a moment of honesty. Here's a quote from G.K. Chesterton, I think getting at the same kind of issue. What a good-looking guy. What, don't you think, G.K. Chesterton there? We are survivors of a wreck, the crew of a golden ship that has gone down before the beginning, or that had gone down before the beginning of the world. There's this sense of life's not what it's supposed to be. We're made for something better than this. There's potential, but it's sort of unrealized, and it's kind of there nagging away at us. Another great philosopher, Morpheus from The Matrix, put it like this: you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You can just hear his voice right now, can't you? You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. Again, I think we can all, to some degree, identify with that, and perhaps this is part of the human condition, this sense of longing and this sense of struggle. And perhaps that is what we have most in common with everybody else on the planet. And when we think about that, I think we can actually consider ourselves incredibly privileged here, actually, because we are people who, for whatever reason, have decided to kind of break anonymity, break denial, at least try to be real about those issues. Like to think, what was that shipwreck? What is that splinter in my mind? What are the roots of my anxieties and pain? Is it safe here to really be myself, to be my true self? And I think so that's a privilege, right? Because we have an opportunity to actually move towards love, to struggle towards love in a way that I think most people do not, because it's just safer and easier to stay in denial, to not talk about those kinds of things. But I think we're all struggling. Our neighbors are struggling, our families are struggling, and we're not better than anybody else. Perhaps we've just actually decided to do something about it. Maybe that's a bridge. Maybe that itself is something that we might have to offer somebody else when we think about befriending our neighborhoods or befriending our neighbors. So let's come back to that story that we just read, because I think we have there in that story a really great example of longing and desire for love. We see that in the woman. Okay, there she is engaging with Jesus. She's sort of hidden away. She's there at noon, right, in the hottest part of the day, which is not when you go to draw water from the well. She's probably got a reputation, and she's showed up at the well at a time when there will be fewer people there. And so there's this sort of sense of hiddenness about her, of obscurity. But there she is, and this story is told in a way that evokes longing, because it's told like these well stories are sort of classic Jewish or Hebrew marriage narratives. So if you think of all the people in the Hebrew scriptures, what we would call the Old Testament, where men meet their wives at wells, right? There's lots of stories of those. So Moses, Isaac. So when we hear about this woman at the well and then Jesus shows up, those stories are evoked. So there's this sense of marriage and longing and love. And we might even imagine, maybe this is Jesus' marriage story. But then it kind of gets flipped around, because it's actually about the woman's relationships and her marriage. It's not really about Jesus in that sense. So there's this twist there. where it's spun around a little bit. But we have Jesus engaging in this context of longing, this longing for love. And that engagement is so beautifully done. It's so safe. Now, if you think about how Jesus is crossing so many potential barriers, or very real barriers actually, in this story. First of all, this is a woman. So, Jesus is on his own with a woman on her own, and he's engaging in conversation with that woman, which is that's a taboo. That's breaking a taboo in the Hebrew culture. He's talking to a Samaritan woman. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, that's another taboo. That Samaritans were viewed as unclean by the Jewish people at that time. He's crossing. This woman is probably of ill repute, right? I mean, she's showed up at the well at noon. She's hiding away. She's probably got a bit of a reputation. And Jesus seems somewhat aware of that. Maybe he has some supernatural knowledge about the woman when he mentions her 5 husbands, and that she's the man she's living with at the moment is not her husband. But perhaps he knows of her, or he's just gained some insight into her life from talking to her. But either way, Jesus is not threatened by that, not thrown by that. So he's making this situation very safe when he could have kept his distance. So there's care that's gone into this. Jesus then kind of homes in this very conversational, relational way. There's this dialogue that goes on, this to and fro. And, it's interesting, I think, that the woman in the story brings it back to religion. Jesus keeps bringing it back to what's real, what's true. He talks about, hey, you can worship on this mountain or on that temple or do this, that, and the other. But ultimately, it's about worshiping in spirit and truth. It's about being your real self, your true self. And being willing to be vulnerable and being open and sort of coming out of this denial, this denial that we were talking about earlier about our struggle, about our need for love, and perhaps the unmet longing in our heart. And Jesus is calling her out to be real and to be honest and to be open. And he uses this metaphor of water, of wells, and just the fact that we're around this well in this story. Again, this sense of longing is represented by the thirst of Jesus, right? Jesus says, can I have some water? So thirst is a metaphor for longing, right? I mean, it's a literal longing as well. The well represents perhaps this real life that we're all hungry for, or thirsty for. We want to drink deeply from real life, meaning and love and intimacy. We want to be known and fully accepted, and we want to be loved and be able to love others. The sort of things that really make our lives meaningful. The well is there, and Jesus is engaging with this woman in this conversation and alluding to, he's using lots of innuendo, and there's a to and fro. He's alluding to the fact that you are actually really thirsty, aren't you? He's not blaming her or condemning her. He's just saying, oh, you're thirsty. It's the irony of Jesus expressing his thirst, where really it's the woman that's really thirsty. That it's the woman that wants to drink so deeply. That it's the woman that is longing for something more from life. It's the woman who has this nagging splinter in her mind. It's this woman that is somehow aware that she's the product of a shipwreck from a golden era. And Jesus reminds her of that. And Jesus says it's okay to remember. And he just beautifully draws her out in this conversation. The art of conversation, especially around religious issues, seems to be being lost. There was a really great article in the New York Times last month. Jonathan Merritt, who's a Christian author but wrote in the Times, he's done some research with the Barna Group about how fewer and fewer people are having spiritual conversations. And he's not just talking about, are you saved? Or please come to my church kind of conversations. He's talking about meaningful conversations about life, the universe, and everything. And there's actually data to suggest that even words that aren't necessarily viewed as specifically religious, but words that have a sort of positive psychological aspect to them, words like patience and faithfulness and kindness and love, are slowly being used less and less in our writing, in our conversation. It's as though we're somewhat inhibited to talk about what is real in our lives. And perhaps, the church, we've kind of contributed to that problem because a conversation ends up being like trying to persuade someone to believe the right thing. I don't think we see Jesus doing that in this story. The woman seems to sort of go to, oh, well, hang on, we've got a different religion to you. And Jesus just talks about spirit and truth and reality. And don't you want to be loved? Don't you want to love? And he draws the woman into that space, into that what is actually very safe space in which she has the chance to drink from this well. And that theme of water, and which Jesus uses in this conversation, obviously is very, I think that resonates very much in Jesus' whole story. And a few chapters later, in chapter 7 of John, Jesus, he's at the Feast of Tabernacles, this festival in Jerusalem. He's gone back to Jerusalem, and he stands up and he says, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up to that time, the Spirit had not yet been given, since Jesus had not been glorified. So there's this sense of water, this metaphor of water being real life, the Spirit of God, the very fabric of the universe, if you like, pouring into us and then flowing through us to others. And that was a very key Hebrew metaphor. If we go back to the prophets, prophet Jeremiah, Jeremiah speaking the words of God, saying, I brought you to a garden land where you could eat lush fruit, but you barged in and polluted my land, trashed and defiled my dear land. I mean, this is reminiscent, I think, of that shipwreck metaphor, or Pascal's quote about us, looking for love in all the wrong places and making a total mess of it. The priests never thought to ask, where's God? The religion experts knew nothing of me. The rulers defied me. The prophets preached God Baal and chased empty God dreams and silly God schemes. My people have committed a compound sin. They've walked out on me, the fountain of fresh flowing waters, and then dug cisterns that leak, cisterns that are no better than sieves. I mean, you could think of that as broken wells, if you like, or contaminated wells. In other words, there's the issue of God in our lives is about health and vitality and love and goodness rather than religion. And we've maybe through religious means or through other practices, we've rejected that well, we've rejected that source, and we've tried to build our own systems, build our own wells, and satisfy ourselves, and we just remain thirsty. So Jesus is engaging this woman around those issues, and as I said at the beginning, I think that's what we have in common with one another, right? All of us have that sense of longing, and all of us have that sense of struggle. And sometimes that's really painful and difficult, but actually there's something, I think, beautiful about it, because it means we're one, right? But that's the commonality in our humanity. That's when I walk down the street, every single person I'm passing has longing and struggle, and every single person has been shipwrecked. Every single person has that splinter in their mind, which occasionally comes to the fore. And perhaps what we can do as we think about friendships, about our presence in our neighborhoods, is simply to create space like Jesus did for that woman. And she's just one specific example. I mean, we have all kinds of different struggles going on in our lives. I mean, she represents one particular. But perhaps we could be like Jesus in creating safe space where other people can just be their true selves. And without pressure, could begin to think through some of those splinters in their mind, some of the struggles in their life, some of the longings for love and to love and be loved. And as their lives begin to open up, or as their needs come to the fore, they're able to perhaps begin to drink in a way that we might have found we've been able to drink. And to me, that's what Jesus did all the time. Jesus went around creating friendships in a context in which that was possible. So we're going to hear from a few people this morning, some stories about, I think, how people have worked to create space for one another, to drink from the wells, healthy wells, to support one another, help one another in their own neighborhoods. And I'm just going to interview a few people here. And as we listen, maybe we could just hold in our own minds, how could we create that kind of space in our own neighborhoods? There's some discussion questions available for this week. You can grab a hard copy out on the welcome desk or download them online. And some of the questions get at this, like what are the wells in our culture today? What are the places where we can just have natural engagement with others in a way that isn't pressured, it's just normal, common human love, where we relate on an equal basis to other people in an accepting, safe kind of way? How could we in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our families create those same kind of environments? So I'm going to invite, first of all, Steve and Tinika, if you guys would like to come up, and they're going to share a little bit. Let's give these guys a round of applause as they come up. They're going to share just a little bit about, there you go, one each, about their own, so if you guys sit here, because we've got some more people coming up. Don't want to fall off the edge of this. So yeah, just tell us a little bit, like where you live and how long you've lived there, first of all. Like Steve, whereabouts do you guys live?
Okay, so our home is in Silver Spring, not far from here, right in the Four Corners area near Blair High School. We moved there in 2006, but we've lived in other parts of Silver Spring for a lot longer.
Yeah, so you know, that's kind of like, in some sense, you're natives of that area, but where you are specifically now, you've been there for 12 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I want to highlight, I'm from Chicago originally.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean it to, yeah. Well, so we'll pray for you later about that, yeah. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, I know maybe, Tinika, you can share a bit about this. You guys have, been very intentional about creating safe space for people and including people in your lives. So tell us just a little bit about why and how you've gone about that.
Sure. So when we moved to Woodmore, our son was 4, and we had kind of a tragic year before that. So we decided to kind of like scoop our lives up and move a little bit closer into like the hubbub and kind of start fresh. So honestly, I think a lot of the reasons why I started wanting to reach out into the neighborhood was kind of selfish, to be honest, because I had a 4-year-old. I was staying at home a lot by myself and kind of needed to go get people, surround myself with people. And so we started, I think it had been a part of our marriage and our like family culture to open our home up and be outgoing. We had lived in a townhouse development in Aspen Hill and had kind of created a really cool little community there. So it was sad to leave, but when we moved into Woodmore, it's kind of a unique little pocket right in downtown Silver Spring area, and so it's very walkable. There's a lot of young families there, and so I think it was almost kind of a selfish reason. So I started reaching out to neighbors and saying hi and making eye contact and inviting them over. And
you invited people into your home. Like how did you go about that? What did you do?
So it's nothing. Matthew and I were talking about this. I don't feel like we're doing anything amazingly special, but my kids say I have a disease, and it's inviting people over to our house. So
it's real.
It's real. It's a struggle. So most Fridays and Saturday nights, we have some neighbor at our home, or we've opened up our home, or we're trying to. So I basically am obnoxious, and so if I meet you for the first time, like at a neighborhood event or a kid thing or the school thing, and I feel like there's some kind of a connection, I'll reach out. I usually chicken out in the first go, so I won't ask you face to face, but I might hint at it, and then I'll usually send you an email and say, hey, can we get together? It's a little vulnerable because I've had people say no or never respond, which happens, but for the most part, people have responded, and it's been a pretty great experience. Because once we've had people over, it changes the dynamic. There's something about opening your home and having people there and kind of hearing a little bit more about their story, and they get to see a picture of who we are, the mess and craziness of who we are. Yeah, so I mean, maybe Steve,
do you have any examples of people that you've, kind of conversations that you've had with people? And
yeah, I mean, there are many examples. Like Tinika said, once there's an opportunity, the first time you bump into somebody because you have a common, space in your life, maybe through your children, maybe through your work. Like Tinika, for example, she's great at reaching out and making connections in her workplace. that's rubbed off on me. So I started a new job when I became a teacher 3.5 years ago. But when I arrived at that new location, I knew very few people, and most of the people there barely knew me. I just jumped in and worked. I didn't really want to meet the person down the hall, get to know people in other departments. But Tinica started a new job a year later. She knew more people that worked with me than I did. So this is an example of opening your mind, opening your eyes, not just maybe my personality is more oriented in, I want to do really well at a task or get my job done well. But there are people.
Which Tinica's not really bothered about that, right?
Her focus, her orientation is towards people. And whether you're introverted or extroverted, for me, it's a great way to reach out beyond my comfort zone, maybe to say.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a terrible introvert, but to actually go forward and see somebody I don't recognize and make a little more eye contact, see if, like Tinica said, is there some kind of little hint of, hey, there could be a connection there.
Yeah.
That's something that I've developed, but it's taken a while.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, and you mentioned the connection, like in your circumstances, like your kids at school, and so there's potential connections there. I mean, we all have different connections depending on our circumstances, a different set of connections, but yours, school, was a big one. And we've got a couple of people. I'm going to invite, it's Mark and Sue, if you guys would like to come up. So you guys are staying here. Yeah, you're staying here. So let's welcome these guys. So we're going to hear a little bit. If you want to grab a chair, and then maybe we can pass these off to. You could actually, if you hold on to one, because we might come back to you, and then you share this. So now you guys were, in some respect, I don't really want to use the term on the receiving end, because that sounds like I don't know, this sounds wrong, but you are in this context that we've been talking about, Steve and Tinica ran into you guys in different ways, right? So, separately. So Mark, why don't you just tell us a little bit about that? What was that? Tell us about your encounter.
Tinica hates this story, so I'm going to have a lot of fun telling it. We live in the same neighborhood, Woodmore. We moved from Tacoma Park, in case you don't know, very liberal area for two men and their black child to be living. So we moved to this neighborhood with a big Catholic church and school, and weren't so sure that was the best place to go. But it turned out to be a great little neighborhood. Kindergarten started, our boys are the same age, they're best friends still in 10th grade, and Will has his birthday in the beginning of the year in October. So we have a little neighborhood directory, so you can call and look up, and my husband's last name is Noyes, and our children are all Noyes. So Tinica looked up Noyes, and there's two of them. Hi, this is Tinica Mather. Our sons are in the same class. Will's having a birthday party. He really wants his new friend Adam to come. It's next Saturday. I'm not sure if this is the right house or not. Call me back. Notice there was no address or time for the party. So I call back, hey, this is Mark Hill, Adam's dad. He loves Will. He would love to come. Let us know where you live and what time next Saturday. We'll be there. Get a call back. Hi, this is Tinica again. I'm really confused. I thought I was calling David Noyes. Some guy named Mark called. I don't know. Hopefully this is the right house. Will really wants Adam to come, and hung up without giving a place or a time. So somehow I think either an invitation came home in the backpacks or something, or another friend was going, so we found out, and I have my defenses up. I'm like, here it is. We're two men with a baby. This is where it's going to affect them. Not happy about it. Don't want my child being treated differently than anyone else. So I go defenses up, not happy about meeting these homophobic people, so upset, but my kid loves his kids. They're like, we're going to go. So we walk in the door, and if you've never met them, it's them. This is what they are. And Tinica's like, hi, I'm Tinica. Nice to meet you. That's my husband, Steve. Hi, I'm Steve. And this is Steve's mom and her partner. And I'm like, two women? Steve has two moms, lesbians? They're good with the gays, we're all good. And so we've been friends ever since. And we are usually on the receiving side we have a Friday night pizza group that they've been included in. So we either have dinner Friday night or we have dinner Saturday night, sometimes both Friday and Saturday night. Then we have dinner on D group, and then sometimes we have lunch on Saturday or Sunday after church or have a sports game. And so if we don't, we get together on a Tuesday or Wednesday or something because we like each other.
A little bit too much.
A little bit too much.
Nice, good. So great story. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Mark. Right, but let's just go over to Sue. So Sue, tell us a little bit about your encounter, which, well, I don't want to pre-let it.
No, it wasn't bad at all. I actually live closer to the neighborhood that Steve and Tinica lived in before, and that is why their son was going to preschool with my son, because they stayed at the same preschool even when they moved. And Will and Eamon met, I guess they were 3, I think, and it was the end of the first day of class, and the teacher called me over and called Tinica over, and she said, I really hope that you ladies like each other because your sons love each other and you're going to have to be friends. And so we just did. No, it was great. It was good. Tinica became a friend, and we would talk about the kid stuff and take care of each other's kids now and again. And
and that also coincided with you going through a pretty hard time, right?
Well, it was a couple of years later. So I had known her for a couple of years, and we had done a lot of switching off. And then our family went through a really hard time. My kids, well, I don't know what to call him now. My ex-husband, but he wasn't that then. So I was going through a divorce, or actually going through a breakup, and not quite sure what to do all the time, and feeling pretty lost. And during that 2-year period of time where we were all getting to know each other, Steve and Tinica had come over for dinner, and we had talked various times. And sometimes Tinica would talk about, well, Steve was the youth pastor at the church at the time, but they never, they didn't talk about church kind of stuff very often. But when they would talk about something, it always sounded really interesting and kind of open. And they absolutely never said, you should come, or check it out, or nothing like that ever. Which actually was the best thing in the world, because when the whole divorce thing came up, I had gone through really awful things when I was the same age as my kids were then. They were like 10 and 6. And the big thing that got me through was this church that I was part of. So it was a Methodist church. It had this female pastor, and she rocked. And after I grew up and moved away, I never found anything quite like that again, where it was very open and accepting and caring. And I mean, this was an amazing woman. Like, she came to visit me once in Atlanta, and we went to visit the church that Martin Luther King had Ebenezer Baptist Church. And she was like, this is where you should go. And I was thinking, you're not very good at like keeping people in your faith. She was like, it's a really cool community. So that was her big thing, was like making connection and community. So anyway, I came here because I wanted something for my kids particularly, and myself as well. But also I knew that Steve felt like a very safe place to me in terms of his leadership with children. Yeah.
So that's cool. So I mean, so really, what you're saying is they didn't say, "Hey, would you come to church?" It was like you trusted them. You had a relationship with them, out of which then you.
Yeah, I think
said, can you give me a bit more information?
Well, I called Tinica, and we went for a walk around Brookside Garden.
Yeah.
So that we could both be staring forward as she was pushing her baby and her thing, and I could cry, and no one was looking at me, and I was saying, "This is what I need, but these are the things I need to know about your community. I cannot go somewhere where I feel like other people are excluded or not accepted, because it's not going to work for me, and it's not going to work for my kids. So I need to know, like, I'm not going to walk in the door if I feel like that's going to happen." And a couple other things, but they were little things, but it was important. And she was like, no, that's not a problem.
So there you are, in a time of life where you're going through some challenges, somewhat of a crisis, and you needed help, or you're looking for support, looking for love, and you found it, which is really cool. It's also interesting, I think, and I'm going to invite Lisa up. Where's Lisa Dobbins? So this is the last person, okay? Come on, Lisa. Got a seat right there for you. So Lisa lives in the neighborhood with Sue, and so tell us a little bit about your friendship with Sue, and even how you ended up coming here, Lisa.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa. We've lived in the same neighborhood probably about 10 to 12 years. I guess our first encounters, our children are all swimmers. And so the neighborhood has a swim team, and the kids were very, very young at the time. So I knew Sue, but we weren't, I would say we were acquaintances, and most of the time we'd see each other in the summer when the kids are swimming. And our kids are kind of all around the same age. I have an older son, and then she had Kaylin, then it's my daughter, then her other son. So they were all kind of in the same group there. And so we'd see each other, picking up the kids from elementary school, things like that. And so I would say that we were friends, we know each other, but we weren't real close. And then, so that's just over the years, and we had other friends in common, things like that. Then a few years ago, I went through my own really traumatic time, I'd say. And Sue just, I don't even know what it was just a conversation or talking, and I think, I think I had said to her, I'm just, the place I'm in is not a good place, I'm looking for something, and I guess I was visiting different churches at the time, and just casually she said to me, she talked about Cedar Ridge, and she just said, I felt like when I went to Cedar Ridge, it was a safe place, and a place that when she was going through a really hard time was a good place for her. And I don't even think I told her when I first came to visit here. I was like, okay, and I just came. And I came a few times, and I don't even think Sue was here, the times that, nothing, but I didn't see her. I just kind of came and, just kept coming. And even people here were just reaching out, and I said to Sue, oh yeah, I went to Cedar Ridge, and she's asked me, how'd you like it? And before I came, I remember there was one thing she said, well, it's different, and I was like, what's that mean? What does different mean? But to me, different can mean distinctive and individual, and I do definitely find that here.
Yeah.
And no, I was grateful, and I keep coming, and like I said, other people started reaching out to me, seeing somebody new, introducing themselves, and I just tried to get involved in a few different things.
Yeah.
And,
so you're part of a small group now, and you became a member.
Not quite a member yet.
Wait, I thought you did.
But
you were going to do the journey. That's right.
We did do the journey.
Yeah.
I did the journey with Matthew.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you touched on even today, Matthew, that really touched me when I was listening is that you said, a safe place, or extending out and maybe seeing someone who is vulnerable or someone who's not in a good place, and that it's okay here. And we met, and I don't know how, but we met, and it just all came out, and it was just like, because I felt like it was a safe place, and those things that you can't keep holding on to, that you're trying to work through. Yeah. And I would say my friend Sue was like that too. I mean, she's invited me over a couple times, and it's just like, it's time to kind of, try to embrace others and look for others in need as well.
Yeah. So I mean, really, we're just stay put for a second. We're kind of out of time, but there's some more questions I would love to ask you, but we probably don't have time for that. But I think what you're saying there, all of you are really saying, just being human, right? Being, if there is such a word, normal, and real, and normal is broken and difficult and struggle, and that's what we're all going through, right? And so I think for us as a community, two things strike me. One is we have the privilege of safe space. It's not perfect, by any means. Like we're not a perfect community, but we have this place that we come to where we can be real and work at our stuff. And I think most people do not have that kind of place, and or that kind of space. Maybe in certain relationships, but there's a distinct absence of that in our community, and in our communities. But also, we as this community can reach out to others and create that kind of space. And what we see here on the stage here, I think, just for me, it's a really beautiful story of of people affecting people by just reaching out with love, with this common human touch. And all kinds of things can happen as we do that, as we engage, as we just look somebody in the eye, or as we invite somebody over for dinner, or we have a conversation with somebody at work, or as we make those efforts that aren't, I'm going to try and make you believe what I believe, or aren't about control or fear or anything like that, but about love and seeing what we have in common. Amazing things can happen. And I think as we look at this stage here, we've got, I think, a really amazing story. And there's many other stories out there, right, that we're not telling at the moment, of connections that you could share and talk about. And that's a really beautiful thing. So let's give these guys a big round of applause. Thanks for being so vulnerable with us. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it. So we're going to take communion now, and we've got grape juice and gluten-free crackers at the front, and in the middle here where we can serve one another, and then there'll be people at the sides, at the side doors, who will serve. If you'd rather have it served to you, you can receive it that way. Just going back to this image of Jesus at the well, and that sense of, or the connotations of a Hebrew marriage narrative. One way of looking at communion, and we've done this here before, is to look at it as like a Hebrew betrothal ceremony, where the bride and bridegroom would drink from a cup, place the cup down, inviting their future partner to drink from the same cup as an expression of acceptance, of saying, I accept you, I want to be committed to you, connected to you. And we can take those analogies a little too far maybe, but what I think we could think about this morning is this offer of vulnerability, that we might ourselves feel, God, I need to drink deeply. I'm feeling broken. I'm feeling like I need more life. I need to experience God's love more. And here is God offering God's self to us. So as we eat and drink, it's like we're saying yes and accepting the love of God. And I think that's clearly what Jesus was doing when he started this, when he broke bread with his friends. And the other side of it is also, because it's not just between us and God, it's between us and one another, it's between us and humanity maybe. If we could think about it in saying yes, we're sort of giving ourselves and saying, okay, I'm going to be that kind of vulnerable person with others. I'm going to reach out to others. I'm going to let people into my space. I'm going to be vulnerable with somebody else so that they can see my own human frailty and know that they have something in common with me. That we're saying yes to God here, but we're also saying yes to humanity and wanting to participate with God in healing and reconciliation. So let's bear those things in mind as we take communion. You can write out prayers. If you have a prayer request, we'd love to pray for you during the week. There's screens at the back there. You can write them out. We'll have somebody or a couple of people at the back who would love to pray with you. If you want to share a need right now, we'd love to pray for you. You can make financial offerings, donations at the side towards the front. And we'll sing some songs together as well, just for these last few minutes. But let's come to this moment with vulnerability in mind and hold that space. So let's just pray. Lord, thank you for these amazing stories we read that where you brought about incredible transformation. You brought life out of death. You brought hope out of darkness. You brought love out of fearful places. And that's what we need. So as we come now and eat and drink, Lord, we want to receive that love and we want to commit to sharing that love. Amen. Please come forward and take the bread and wine.